What causes autism? Is autism caused from pesticides? Is it genetic? Or is the problem vaccines? Our group will be debating the possible causes of autism. Brianna and Alexandra will be discussing genetics. Robin and Marcella will be discussing pesticides. And Aaron and myself will be discussing vaccines. Frequently asked questions will be answered at the conclusion of the debate. Now to begin the debate with genetic causes.
There have been many studies done to find a link between genetics and the causes of autism. In 2014, a study done by Bryony Jones found multiple ways in which genetics could play a role in autism. The study found that DUF 1220 copy number is directly associated with the severity of symptoms shown by individuals with autism, such as the ability to replicate social cues, their communication abilities, and the causes and severity of repetitive behaviors. Jones also found that early brain overgrowth was a common feature displayed by individuals diagnosed with autism. The overgrowth in the brain was shown to be related to prefrontal cortices affecting communication and social comprehension, and the temporal cortices, which affects one's language, all which are areas of deficits in individuals with autism. Jones's research found that there is a genetic factor amongst individuals with ASD, but it displays high and complex variability amongst individuals. Another study done by Alexandra Perry began doing genetic testing to determine the cause of autism and its linkage to genetics due to the chronic deficits and lifelong symptoms individuals diagnosed with ASD continuously live with. Perry expressed that the importance of genetic testing to determine the cause of autism and made parents give proxy consent before any testing was completed. He stated that genetic screening was important because once the genetic links were found to autism, it will allow professionals, parents, and individuals with autism to better understand the reasons behind it and how to approach treatments. In conclusion, this research has found some genetic linkage that cause autism and is in compliance with Ethical Code 2.05, protecting the rights and prerogatives of clients by providing clients with their rights and consent to complete the research involved.
Though Brianna points out there is a clear connection of ASD amongst families, Protege and other researchers argue that it is unclear how there is a link. The literature explains that previous research done amongst families, especially twin studies, suggests there is a 90% chance of heritability. This finding also aligns with findings suggested in trajectories leading to autism spectrum disorders as affected by paternal age, findings from 2 national represented twin studies. 10 to 15% of individuals have a diagnosis of ASD due to the comorbidity of a genetic disorder such as TSC or Fragile X. Twins have been performed and showed little linkage, especially amongst fraternal twins. Those are twins that are not identical. The mitosis resulting in identical twins may pose an increased risk in ASD symptoms in either twin, but is not a genetic passage of ASD. Research comparing the rates of ASD in those with Down syndrome among siblings found little evidence to support genetic linkage in ASD. 5.8% of siblings also had ASD symptoms, whereas 0% of siblings to those with Down syndrome was found. 12.4% of siblings of ASD showed repetitive behaviors, whereas Down syndrome siblings were found to have a 1.6% correlation of repetitive movements. Aligning with this research and finding amongst parents of children with ASD, Protege presents evidence that 10 to 45% of parents of children with ASD and their children had similar social impairments. Those children with obsessive compulsive disorder within the same study had at least one parent that shared the diagnosis. Though there was a notable difference in the comparison groups, there is still no clear evidence to support a specific chromosomal linkage. Protégé suggests there is a start in finding linkages to the X chromosome. However, as stated previously, there is no specific linkage at this time. Protégé admitted to the shortcomings of his research, but holds strong to the possibility of future technological advances that will further uphold his findings. Further evidence to support this research is in the research of prenatal stressors. Bevizor and associates looked into investigating prenatal stressors as a possible cause rather than genetic causation. Surveys were given to 434 mothers of children with Down syndrome, ASD, and a control-based group of mothers that had children who were typically developing. The survey focused on events that may have caused the mother exponential stress up until 1 year before the birth of their child. Survey questions also included the time of year the child was born, how close the child was born to their due date, and any medical treatment the mother may have needed during pregnancy. The answers were then paired with the Social Readjustment Rating Scale, SRRS, and researchers compared answers with the gestation of the pregnancy. Researchers were primarily concerned with the stressors that occurred during weeks 28 to 32 gestation. Stressors were ranked based on their severity, such as the death of a parent ranking 100, whereas divorce of a spouse ranked a score of 70. Return surveys found some interesting results. Maternal age was much lower for the control group versus maternal age of mothers that had children with Down syndrome and ASD. The control group had a mean score of 18. Stressors where the ASD mothers averaged 32. Stressors during the pinpointed gestation time frame of 28 to 32 weeks. The survey also showed Down syndrome and ASD mothers had increased illness during this time, as well as compared to the control group across all weeks, but primarily in weeks 28 to 32. Language delays in ASD also paralleled with the mothers that identified prenatal stressors. The overall finding of the study showed there is a possible linkage to maternal prenatal stress and ASD symptoms in their children. Thus, the children did not inherit ASD, but rather had manipulations in brain development that caused it. The research also highlighted that stress and ASD symptoms could simply be coincidental and need larger case studies performed to further support the findings. Supporting the idea that autism is caused by genetic heritability is a violation of Compliance Code 2.09. Behavior analysts have always had the obligation to advocate for and educate the client about scientifically supported, most efficient treatment procedures. Effective treatment procedures have been validated as having both long-term and short-term benefits to clients and society. Now we will discuss possible environmental causes of autism, starting with pesticides.
I will discuss the pesticide causes linked with autism. So the first questions we want to ask ourselves is, how safe are the pesticides? And are we better off consuming foods that have pesticides on them or not? And what is organic anyway? The scientific journal Nature Plants makes the claim that organic produce foods that contain less or no pesticide residues compared with conventional farming, and so the actual difference is only 8 pesticides. Pesticides are an important tool in the development of agriculture, and their use has contributed to the production of food and raw materials despite the efforts made to find non-chemical methods that help the control of pests and dangerous plagues in our foods. The requirements of national healthcare and consumer standards require strict quality conditions that fundamentally influence the decisions adopted by all growers inclined mainly by chemical control due to its short-term effectiveness and compliance with markets. In general, we have evolved through the adaptation of products, seeds, cultural techniques, and especially in chemical products developed based on scientific studies to ensure the crops production are safe and until there is strong evidence that pinpoints towards the otherwise, these controls and protocols will be continuing to change because they are closely monitored and regulated by the state and the healthcare standards. Pesticides have been used along the century to prevent mosquito and insect pests, which could cause severe illness when ingesting and sometimes death. We have improved the consumption safety of our foods thanks to the pesticides usage. So these pesticides' main goal have been, and it is also proven to eradicate plagues and pests from fruits and vegetables, which have been measured through irradiation reversible experiments by the Society of Chemical Industry. At the CDC works diligently promoting safety, top-notch healthcare standards, and the effective use of pesticides as a way to prevent illness and injuries as well. They continuing with research among the usage of pesticides in foods, commerce produce to the public. With this said, pesticides under the CDC regulations and standards are a way to prevent other dangerous conditions. There is no autism link related to the usage of pesticides. In fact, there is more literature enforcing the usage of pesticides compared to prevent serious and severe illness. To conclude, chemicals are or agrochemicals are any of the series of chemicals, including pesticides, are designed to control pests and increase crops. Fertilizers such as ammonia and animal manure increase crops as well. Chemicals in general, such as insecticides and herbicides, help control the presence of unwanted plants and insects. Many are toxic, and all have an impact in both environmental and crops. However, we are often critical of industrial agriculture and pesticides usage, claiming without strong evidence the link with autism and any other conditions. With all these procedures that sound so bad, we should not forget that it is the usage of pesticides which allow us not to go hungry, that harvests are enough, and they are eradicating many of the life-threatening diseases to us, to the plants, and to the animals. Robin will continue discussing about pesticides and against pesticides.
Okay. I will talk about why pesticides have not been conclusively linked to rates of autism. The nature of doing research on the link between autism and pesticides is problematic. Pesticides are used extensively worldwide, and it's impossible to find a clean control group. Factors such as drift in the air, water, and soil make measuring exposure to pesticides difficult. A study in 2007 by Roberts did take into account drift. However, that study relied extensively on reporting to the government registry of use of pesticides. Other studies have also used the same registry. However, there are pesticides that are used casually by small farms, maybe in individual yards. There are also pesticides used illegally because people are not reporting these to the government registry. Many kinds of pesticides exist. It's very nearly impossible to study each individual one. Oftentimes, pesticides are used in conjunction with another pesticide, so they'll use maybe one or two or more at the same time. Gary in 2002 did a study of pesticide applicators which attempted to address the issue of exposure and kinds of pesticides. However, the study did not yield any conclusive evidence to a link with autism. In that study, the overall rate of autism was nearly identical to the overall population. In conclusion, there has not been conclusive evidence to support pesticides being linked to increased risk of autism. More studies will need to be completed to see if there is more of a link. And next, we will discuss autism and the link with vaccines.
As the rate of autism increases, people continue to question vaccines causing autism. In 1988, Dr. Andrew Wakefield conducted a study on the MMR vaccine in autism. Parents of the 8 participants in the study reported the onset of autism symptoms after the MMR vaccine was administered. Wakefield reported a possible relationship among gastrointestinal abnormalities and the vaccine. It was suggested that the MMR vaccine may damage the bowel, resulting in altered absorption of nutrients, vitamins, and minerals. The altered absorption affected neurodevelopment that led to manifestations of autism. In 2016, Wakefield produced a documentary, Vaxxed, which included parent interviews and information from a Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, whistleblower. Parents of children with autism were interviewed and all reported normally developing children prior to the MMR vaccine given at 18 months of age. Parents shared home videos of their normally developing child talking, walking, and engaging prior to their vaccine. After the children were given the MMR vaccine, they broke out in a fever that night or the following day, losing speech and the ability to walk, regressing into autism. After the vaccines were given, videos showed loss of language, loss in walking, and children that were unattached. One psychologist described this state as toxic overload and suggested their bodies were not able to detoxify the vaccine. Dr. William Thompson, a CDC scientist, reported a study that was conducted over 2 years and included 5 scientists, found a correlation to vaccines causing autism. He reported the study resulted in the vaccine causing autism when given at a younger age compared to waiting until age 3, and was also more prevalent in African American children. The records were destroyed, and the CDC created a fraudulent MMR study to deny the claims of children with autism. Dr. Wakefield recommended giving the measles, mumps, and rubella in single doses instead of the triple-dosed MMR vaccine, stating the autism rate was lower when it was provided in single doses. There has also been claims that vaccines using mercury, containing the preservative thimerosal, causes autism. The dangers of mercury have been known. Would reducing the age that the MMR vaccine is given, removing mercury from vaccines, or breaking the vaccine into 3 single doses reduce the risk of autism?
There is currently no empirical evidence to support a link between autism and vaccines, as seen in research and illustrated in a meta-analysis done in 2014. The study found in its review that the risk incurred by not immunizing increases a greater risk of contracting highly infectious diseases, as there were 17 recorded cases of measles outbreaks in the US in 2011 alone. As the data consistently shows a lack of association between autism and vaccines, there is no reason one should avoid immunizations. The one published study claiming to have found a link between ASD and vaccines was the infamous Wakefield study, which has since been completely redacted, with a statement reporting there was, quote, no causal link established between the MMR vaccine and autism, as the data were insufficient, unquote. The original study utilized a small sample size, an uncontrolled design, and reported speculative conclusions. Financial interests were released, as well as several elements of the paper were found to be incorrect. Wakefield and the authors of the study were held guilty of ethical violations and scientific misinterpretation and deliberate fraud. According to the US Food and Drug Administration, there is a decreased level of thimerosal present in vaccines today. The FDA released that their research also did not find a link between vaccines and autism. In fact, most vaccines have removed mercury from their formulas back in 2002 and 2003, and the ones that still do contain mercury only have trace amounts of 0.01%, if at all. The only kind of link that can be concluded and associated with vaccines and autism is the age of an autism diagnosis typically aligns with the recommended vaccine schedule for children according to the Center for Disease Control, which is roughly around 12 to 18 months of age. We will now move on to frequently asked questions.
Each of these questions pertain to subject matter we just covered in our discussion. The first question is, do the benefits of genetic testing outweigh the consequences to determine the cause? Genetic testing for ASD genotypes is suggested for families that already have a member diagnosed, whether that be the parent or a sibling. Families must discuss the ethical and legal considerations of genetic testing. One major thing to consider is the studies surrounding the pros and cons of genetic research for ASD is limited at this time. And as previously mentioned, the CDC notes that you must have a measurable, observable account of ASD symptoms, and there's no medical testing to confirm an ASD diagnosis. One of the few studies conducted surveys to parents as to whether or not they'd be willing to test their unborn fetus for genes that are often associated with ASD. Finding these genes could help families set up early intervention services to give their children the best chance at treatment. However, as already noted, there is no guarantee to this diagnosis. And ultimately, it is up to the family whether they feel comfortable having genetic testing for their family.
Are there long-term effects caused by genetic testing? There is currently no empirical evidence to back or support the long-term effects of a fetus due to genetic testing.
Are the ethics of research on individuals with ASD considered before testing? Is consent given? Are they able to give consent? Due to the nature of the research behind the causes of ASD, most individuals directly affected are unable to give their consent directly, since oftentimes they are studied before sometimes even conception, when they're a fetus or a newborn, or just in general, they're a minor. Because of this, it runs into code 2.05 involving the consent of the individual. Their parent or guardian is able to legally give consent, but the individual, by the time this study is over, frequently they are not old enough to give informed consent.
How can you determine the cause of autism? Is it the same in all cases? As seen by the research shared within our debate, many speculate the specific cause of autism. Potential causes include genetics, pesticide, vaccines, and the list continues. However, unfortunately, at this present time, research has been insufficient and inconclusive in determining one specific cause for autism.
Are there specific pesticides that cause autism, or is it all types? There are a variety of pesticides that are suspected of causing autism, but some more than others. Research has not determined that a specific pesticide causes autism.
Is it only vaccines that contain mercury that are believed to cause autism? Mercury is a rare environmental toxin. Exposure to all the mercury forms, inorganic, or elemental, can have adverse reactions and develop nervous system mechanisms. Mercury in the form of metal mercury is linked most closely in the public mind with environmental pollution and has a history as public and infamous as the history has been quite inconspicuous. Much of the mercury debates alleged similarity or dissimilarity to any type of mercury which are found in different environmental exposures, not related only to vaccines, but it is found that vaccines contain, or the thimerosal vaccines that had that replacement of mercury cause autism. It's also found in the bay. The bacteria was found in the bay. Then researchers concluded that mercury was found in the discharge from the plant into mercury exposure. And
In summary, the cause of autism is unknown. Though there are many probable causes of autism, very few have empirical research supporting the claims, as discussed today. Genetics, pesticides, vaccines, and environmental causes are all well-known suspects of causes of ASD. Research to pinpoint a more precise cause. Though they are suspected causes, it is unethical to rule any suspected cause as the cause of a client's diagnosis at this time. We thank you for watching our presentation and our debate in the causes of autism.